In the heart of Chicago's South Side, Marcus Patton Williams rules his high school with an iron fist, feared for his explosive temper and respected for his brilliant mind. When a quiet transfer student named Isaiah refuses to bow to his intimidation, Patton's carefully constructed armor begins to crack. Through 4 transformative chapters, we follow Patton's journey from a young man imprisoned by anger and reputation to someone willing to face the painful truth no one dared tell him, that his rage is destroying not just others, but himself. The King of Lincoln Prep. The January wind cut through Chicago's South Side like a blade, rattling the chain-link fence surrounding Lincoln Prep High School. Gray clouds hung low over the red brick building, casting shadows across the cracked basketball courts where snow had piled into dirty mounds along the edges. It was 7:45 a.m., and the hallways were already buzzing with the electric tension that always preceded Marcus Williams' arrival. Marcus, though everyone called him Patton, a nickname earned in sophomore year after he'd orchestrated a student walkout with military precision, stood 6'2", with broad shoulders that filled out his leather jacket like a threat. His dark eyes held a permanent challenge, and his jaw was perpetually clenched as if he were always one comment away from explosion. At 17, he'd built a reputation that made teachers nervous and students step aside when he walked past. "Yo, Patton's coming up the street," whispered Devin Martinez, pressing his face against the second-floor window. The small crowd of students near the lockers immediately began dispersing, like pigeons scattering from a hawk's shadow. Patton pushed through the front doors with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no, or rather, someone who'd made sure that anyone who tried had immediately regretted it. His boots echoed on the worn linoleum, each step a reminder of his presence. Behind him trailed his usual crew, Jerome, his enforcer, Maya, who handled his business transactions, and Curtis, the yes-man who laughed at everything Patton said. "Morning, Mr. Williams," said Mrs. Chen, the assistant principal, her voice carefully neutral. She'd learned 2 years ago that confrontation only made things worse. Patton didn't acknowledge her. Acknowledgement implied equality. The hallway parted for him like the Red Sea. Freshmen flattened themselves against lockers. A sophomore girl named Ashley who'd once made the mistake of rejecting his advances quickly ducked into a bathroom. Tommy Rodriguez, who still walked with a slight limp after accidentally being shoved down the stairs last semester, turned completely around and walked the other direction. "Feels good to be king, don't it?" Jerome grinned, his gold tooth catching the fluorescent light. Patton didn't smile. He never smiled. Smiling was weakness. They arrived at Patton's locker, technically not his, but its previous owner had transferred schools after one too many misunderstandings, and Patton spun the combination lock with practiced ease. Inside, beyond the textbooks he never opened, was a small notebook. His real notebook. The one where he wrote things he'd never let anyone see, observations about people, strategies for maintaining control, and occasionally, in the back pages in handwriting that looked nothing like his usual aggressive scrawl, poetry. Patton. A voice cut through his thoughts. He turned to see Mr. Harrison, the English teacher who'd been at Lincoln Prep for 30 years and had seen every type of student imaginable. Unlike the other teachers, Harrison didn't flinch when Patton looked at him. "We need to talk about your essay." "What about it?" Patton's voice was flat, dangerous. "You didn't turn one in. Again. That's 3 weeks in a row." The hallway had gone quiet. Everyone was watching. This was the moment when Patton would establish, once again, that rules didn't apply to him. "Maybe I didn't feel like writing about The Great Gatsby," Patton said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Maybe I got better things to do than read about some rich white dude's problems." "The assignment was to write about any book that explores the American dream," Mr. Harrison said calmly. "You could have chosen any text. But you chose to do nothing." Patton stepped closer, using his height advantage. "You got a problem with that?" Mr. Harrison held his ground, but Patton saw it, that tiny flicker in his eyes. Fear. Or maybe just exhaustion. Everyone at Lincoln Prep was exhausted when it came to Marcus Williams. Just turn in something by Friday, or you fail the semester. Mr. Harrison walked away, and Patton knew he'd won again. Yo, Mr. Harrison shook. Curtis laughed, but the sound was hollow. The first bell rang. Patton headed toward calculus, a class he attended only because Mrs. Rodriguez was too terrified to mark him absent. He slid into his seat at the back, feet up on the desk, when he noticed someone sitting in his spot, the desk by the window where he could watch the door and the teacher simultaneously. A kid he'd never seen before. Thin, maybe 5'9", with dark skin and glasses that made him look like he spent too much time reading. He wore a simple gray hoodie and jeans, nothing remarkable, but he was sitting in Patton's spot with his notebook already open, completely oblivious to the violation he'd just committed. Yo, Patton called out. That's my seat. The new kid looked up, blinked once, then returned to his notebook. The classroom went silent. Even Mrs. Rodriguez stopped writing on the board. Patton stood up slowly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He walked over to the desk, towering over the new student. I said, that's my seat. The kid finally looked up fully. His eyes behind those glasses were calm, almost curious. I don't see your name on it. Gasps rippled through the classroom. No one, talked back to Patton. You knew here. Patton's voice was low, controlled. The voice he used right before things got physical. Isaiah Carter. Transferred from Atlanta last week. He extended his hand. Patton stared at the hand like it was a foreign object. I don't shake hands with people who don't know their place. Then I guess we're not shaking hands, Isaiah said simply, pulling his hand back and returning to his notes. The disrespect was so complete, so total, that Patton actually took a step back. In his entire high school career, no one had ever dismissed him. He'd been feared, hated, respected, and obeyed, but never dismissed. Mr. Williams, please take a seat, Mrs. Rodriguez said nervously. Any seat. Patton's jaw clenched so hard he thought his teeth might crack. He stared at Isaiah for another long moment, memorizing his face, calculating. Then he walked back to a different desk, ignoring the confused looks from his crew. But throughout the entire class, he couldn't concentrate. His eyes kept drifting to the back of Isaiah's head. Who was this kid? Where did he get the nerve? And more importantly, why wasn't he afraid? After class, as students filed out, Patton deliberately positioned himself in the doorway, blocking Isaiah's exit. We're not done, Patton said quietly. Isaiah looked up at him without any visible emotion. I think we are. Nobody disrespects me like that. I didn't disrespect you. I just sat in a chair. Isaiah's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was explaining something obvious to a child. If you think that's disrespect, maybe the problem isn't me. Patton's hand shot out, grabbing Isaiah's backpack strap. Listen, transfer. Marcus. The voice came from behind them. Principal Davidson stood in the hallway, arms crossed. Let him go. Now. Patton released the strap but leaned in close to Isaiah's ear. This ain't over. I didn't think it was, Isaiah replied, and walked away without looking back. The rest of the day passed in a blur of anger. Patton couldn't focus in any of his classes. He snapped at Jerome for laughing too loud. He nearly got into a fight with a senior who accidentally bumped into him. By lunch, everyone knew to give him an even wider berth than usual. He sat in the cafeteria at his table, the one by the windows where he could see everything, pushing food around his tray. His crew sat around him, but they knew better than to talk when he was in one of his moods. That's when Isaiah walked past with his lunch tray, heading toward an empty table in the corner. Yo, new kid. Jerome called out. You sitting alone? Isaiah paused, turned. Looks like it. That's sad, man. You should come sit with us. Patton would love that, wouldn't you, Patton? Jerome's voice dripped with sarcasm, with threat. Patton leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching Isaiah carefully. This was another test. If Isaiah showed fear, came over trying to make amends, Patton would own him. If Isaiah ran, Patton would make his life hell. But Isaiah did neither. "Thanks for the offer," he said simply, "but I'm good." And he walked to his table, sat down, and opened a book while he ate. Maya leaned over. "You want me to handle him?" Patton shook his head slowly. "Nah. This one's different. This one's mine." The afternoon sun filtered weakly through the cafeteria windows, casting long shadows across the tables. Outside, the temperature was dropping, promising another brutal Chicago night. But inside, something else was dropping, the temperature of Patton's calculated patience. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus Patton Williams had met someone who didn't play by his rules. And he had no idea what to do about it. The final bell couldn't come fast enough. As students poured out of Lincoln Prep into the freezing January afternoon, Patton positioned himself at the front steps, the spot where he always held court. Today, though, he wasn't there to socialize. He was waiting. Isaiah emerged at 3:47 p.m., backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds in. He walked down the steps without glancing in Patton's direction, heading toward the bus stop on 47th Street. Patton followed. He kept his distance, watching the way Isaiah moved, unhurried, unworried, like he didn't have a care in the world. Like he didn't know that the most dangerous person at Lincoln Prep was 20 feet behind him. They crossed 2 blocks before Patton made his move, catching up in 3 long strides. He grabbed Isaiah's shoulder, spinning him around. Isaiah pulled out one earbud, looked at Patton's hand on his shoulder, then up at Patton's face. "Can I help you?" "Yeah. You can explain who you think you are." "I'm Isaiah Carter. We established that this morning." "Don't play with me." Patton stepped closer. Around them, a few students had stopped walking, sensing drama. "You come into my school, sit in my seat, walk past my table like I'm nothing." "Your school?" Isaiah interrupted. "Last I checked, Lincoln Prep was a public institution." "Your seat?" "It's school property." "Your table?" He glanced back toward the building. "Also school property." The small crowd that had gathered laughed nervously. No one laughed at Patton's expense. Patton's hands balled into fists. "You think you're funny?" "No. I think I'm accurate. I could beat your ass right here, right now." "You could try," Isaiah said calmly. "But then what? You feel better about yourself? You've proven you can physically overpower someone smaller than you. Congratulations, you've reached the same achievement level as a middle school bully." The words hit harder than any punch could have. Patton's crew had caught up now, forming a semicircle around Isaiah. "Yo, Patton, you want us to," Jerome started. "Shut up," Patton snapped. His eyes never left Isaiah's face. "Why aren't you scared?" "Because fear is a choice," Isaiah said simply. "And I choose not to give you that power over me. Everybody's scared of something." "True. I'm scared of failure. Of letting down people who count on me. Of not living up to my potential." Isaiah adjusted his backpack. "But you're just another person trying to make yourself feel bigger by making others feel smaller. And honestly, that's just sad." The word "sad" hung in the cold air like a condemnation. Several students murmured, glancing at Patton to see how he'd react to being pitted. Patton's breath came faster, his chest tightening with a rage so familiar it felt like coming home. This was the moment. This was when he usually struck, when he reminded everyone why they feared him. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way Isaiah looked at him, not with fear or even defiance, but with something worse, disappointment. Like Patton was a puzzle Isaiah had already solved and found wanting. "You're lucky we're in public," Patton finally said, the words tasting like defeat. "Am I?" Isaiah put his earbud back in. See you tomorrow, Marcus. He walked away, and for the second time that day, Patton let him go. Jerome whistled low. Man, you going soft on us? I said shut up. Patton turned and walked in the opposite direction, ignoring the confused looks from his crew, ignoring the whispers from the students who'd witnessed the exchange. He didn't go home. Instead, he walked for 40 minutes through the cold Chicago streets, past the corner store where Mr. Kim always had his radio on too loud, past the church where his grandmother used to take him before she died, past the basketball court where he'd learned that being feared meant you never had to play alone. He ended up at the lakefront, where chunks of ice floated in Lake Michigan's gray water. The wind was brutal here, cutting through his jacket, but he barely felt it. His hands gripped the metal railing, knuckles white. You're just another person trying to make yourself feel bigger by making others feel smaller. Why did those words hurt so much? Why did they echo in his head louder than any insult, any threat, any challenge he'd ever faced? His phone buzzed. Text from his mother, working late again. Money on the counter for dinner. Same message, different day. She'd been working double shifts at the hospital for 3 years now, ever since his father left. Patton barely saw her anymore. Maybe that's why he'd built this armor, this reputation. If you're feared, you can't be abandoned. If you're in control, nothing can hurt you. Except that wasn't true, was it? His phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Maya, you good? You seemed off today. He didn't reply. Instead, he pulled out the notebook from his backpack, the real one, the secret one. He flipped to a blank page and, with fingers numb from cold, began to write. What if being king means being alone? What if strength is just fear wearing a crown? What if the loudest voice is the most desperate to be heard? He stopped, stared at the words, then ripped the page out and watched it flutter down to the icy water below. Even his private thoughts felt like betrayal now. By the time Patton got home, it was dark. The apartment was empty, as expected. Money on the counter, as promised. He ordered pizza, ate it standing up at the kitchen counter, and did exactly zero homework. Instead, he found himself searching for Isaiah Carter on social media. The kid's Instagram was private, but his Twitter was public. Recent tweets. First day at new school. Buildings change. People are universal. Finished, Invisible Man, by Ralph Ellison. If you think it's just about race, you missed the point. The opposite of love isn't hate. It's indifference. Patton closed the app, frustrated. Who was this kid who quoted philosophy and read Ellison and acted like Patton Williams was nothing more than a minor inconvenience? He lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the radiator clank and the muffled sounds of his neighbor's TV through the thin walls. For the first time in years, he couldn't sleep. Because for the first time in years, someone had looked at him and seen through everything he'd built. And the worst part? That someone had been right. Tomorrow, Patton decided, things would be different. Tomorrow, he'd show Isaiah Carter exactly what happened to people who didn't respect the natural order of Lincoln Prep. But somewhere in the dark, in a part of himself he'd locked away years ago, a quiet voice whispered, or maybe tomorrow, you could try something different. He pushed the thought away, rolled over, and forced his eyes closed. Outside, the Chicago wind howled, and the first snow of another storm began to fall. Cracks in the armor. The next morning arrived with fresh snow covering Lincoln Prep's courtyard in a deceptive blanket of white, hiding the cracks in the concrete and the litter beneath. By 7:30 a.m., the parking lot was already a mess of slush and salt, and students shuffled through the hallways with wet boots, tracking gray footprints across the floors. Patton arrived early, unusual for him. He'd barely slept, his mind cycling through scenarios of how he'd handle Isaiah today. But when he reached his locker, he found something that made him freeze. A book. Sitting on top of his textbooks where it definitely hadn't been yesterday. The autobiography of Malcolm X. No note. No explanation. Just the book. He glanced around, but the hallway was nearly empty. Jerome wouldn't arrive for another 20 minutes. Maya was probably still on the bus. Who had accessed his locker? And why this book specifically? Patton picked it up, flipped through the pages. Someone, probably Isaiah, it had to be Isaiah, had placed sticky notes on certain passages. He read one. I have often reflected upon the new vistas that reading opened to me. I knew right there in prison that reading had changed forever the course of my life. Another sticky note, further in. Don't be in a hurry to condemn because he doesn't do what you do or think as you think or as fast. There was a time when you didn't know what you know today. Patton slammed the locker shut, his jaw tight. What was Isaiah trying to do? Psychoanalyze him? Fix him? The condescension of it made his blood boil. Morning, Patton. He spun around. Isaiah stood there, backpack slung over one shoulder, that same calm expression. You broke into my locker. I didn't break anything. Curtis gave me your combination. Curtis? The betrayal stung more than Patton wanted to admit. I asked him nicely. Turns out when you're not intimidating people, they're actually pretty helpful. Isaiah adjusted his glasses. Did you read any of it? Why would I read anything you give me? Because Malcolm X was angry too. Angrier than you, probably. But he learned to channel it into something that mattered. Isaiah started to walk past, then paused. You're not nearly as scary as you think you are, Marcus. You're just loud. Patton grabbed Isaiah's arm. I'm warning you. You've been warning me since yesterday, Isaiah said, looking down at Patton's hand on his arm. At some point, you either do something or you admit you're all talk. Which is it? The hallway had started filling up. Students were watching again, phones out, ready to capture whatever happened next. Patton felt the weight of his reputation pressing down on him like physical force. Everything he'd built required him to do something, push Isaiah, threaten him, make him regret his words. But Isaiah's eyes held that same unwavering calm, and something in Patton's chest twisted uncomfortably. He released Isaiah's arm. Stay out of my way. I wasn't in your way to begin with, Isaiah replied, and walked off toward first period. Jerome arrived moments later, grinning. Yo, I heard the new kid put a book in your locker. That's hilarious. You want me to? No. Patton slammed his locker shut. Just leave it. Leave it? Man, you feeling okay? Patton didn't answer. He couldn't explain the confusion churning in his gut, the way Isaiah's words kept echoing in his head, you're just loud. First period was American history. Mr. Thompson was lecturing about the civil rights movement, but Patton wasn't listening. 3 rows ahead, Isaiah sat taking notes, completely focused. How did he do that? How did he just exist, unbothered by everything? Mr. Williams, Mr. Thompson called out. Can you tell us about the significance of the March on Washington?